To destroy a dynasty, the best approach is not to mount a frontal assault on the heavily guarded front gates. Instead, you must quietly slip through the back door, where defenses are down and secrets easily leak out. This is precisely the story behind the collapse of the billionaire J. Seward Johnson family, featuring a central figure who has been vilified for decades as a scheming woman, Barbara Piasecka Johnson. For the longest time, history has locked Barbara Piasecka Johnson into a very familiar script: the penniless immigrant maid who engineered a flawless plan to seduce an aging billionaire and steal his entire fortune. Everyone assumed Barbara was a textbook gold digger, while the Johnson children viewed her as a pure parasite. However, if you look past the gossip and witness the details of the buried will, you will realize she was not just an outsider trying to reach above her station in vain. How did an ordinary woman who initially could not even cook a proper meal manage to step-by-step dismantle an entire empire from the inside out? What did Barbara really see behind those closed doors that the rest of the world was completely blind to? Hit like and subscribe to join me as we peel back the layers of this power game and discover who was actually holding the handle of the knife. To understand how she did it, we have to go back to the very first day Barbara walked through the servants' entrance, where the dark corners are never touched by light. Barbara Piasecka was born in 1937 in Poland, a country that was soon to be crushed and left rebuilding from the ruins of war under an incredibly harsh regime. Being the daughter of a railway worker, her childhood was defined by discipline, poverty, and strict religious faith. In a society where your position was almost predetermined from birth, the only path for Barbara to seek a better life was through education. She successfully enrolled at the University of Warsaw to pursue a degree in art history. Throughout her college years, Barbara immersed herself in old master European paintings and religious artifacts, studying them through worn-out library books and faded lecture slides. These were world masterpieces that a poor girl in Poland at that time had no realistic hope of ever seeing in person. In her homeland, that university degree was nothing more than a ticket for a train that had long since left the station. By 1968, suffocated by her bleak circumstances, Barbara decided to take the biggest gamble of her life and emigrated to the United States. She arrived in the land of opportunity with a mere $100 in her pocket, extremely limited English, and an art history degree that seemed completely useless in a deeply pragmatic country. Through the support networks of the Catholic Church, Barbara began taking basic manual labor jobs just to survive, before eventually being recommended for a position at a sprawling estate in New Jersey. Across the ocean, in a completely different world, J. Seward Johnson was living a life that millions dreamed of, but one that was, in reality, utterly hollow. As a direct heir to the pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson, he possessed a staggering fortune alongside the ultimate privileges of the American upper class. Yet, behind that glamorous facade laid a private life, standing on the absolute brink of collapse. By the late 1960s, Seward Johnson's marriage to his then-wife, Esther, had grown completely cold. Ultimate wealth could not buy him a genuine home. However, the deepest, most profound fracture in the billionaire's life was his toxic relationship with his 6 adult children. In reality, ever since the children were young, Seward Johnson had set up massive individual trust funds for them, ensuring they would live a luxurious, pampered life forever without ever having to break a sweat. But this very generosity unwittingly bred an underlying tragedy. To his 6 children, the aging billionaire was no longer a father to be respected or loved. He had slowly morphed into a literal mobile ATM, a walking trust fund. Seward Johnson could acutely feel the indifference, coldness, and selfishness radiating from his own flesh and blood. He realized his children only materialized when they needed cash, and their annual family gatherings always smelled heavily of financial calculations. In the twilight of his life, the billionaire fell into a state of profound isolation within his own fortress of money, desperate for a genuine human connection while surrounded by relatives who were simply waiting for him to pass away. This deep emotional vacuum within the Johnson family inadvertently created a perfect opening. When Barbara stepped through the back door to take a cleaning job, she had no idea she was entering a fortress already rotted to its core, where a bizarre twist of fate was about to unfold from the most unexpected places. When Barbara first crossed the threshold of the estate in 1968, her beginning was an unmitigated professional disaster. She was initially hired as a cook, but the Polish girl's culinary skills were shockingly terrible. Undercooked meals and a string of kitchen accidents quickly drew complaints from both the family and the other staff. Within a very short time, Barbara was demoted from cook to a common maid, and eventually became a personal maid, tasked with cleaning rooms, doing laundry, and running errands. She became an invisible ghost in the house, performing the unseen manual labor that sustained the lifestyle of an ultra-wealthy family. Yet, instead of being fired or quitting in frustration, Barbara chose to stay. And it was at this very low point that she discovered her ultimate weapon. That weapon was her art history degree, which the outside world had deemed useless. The Johnson estate was filled with old master paintings, priceless antiques, and rare religious artifacts, the very things Johnson's children never bothered to look at. But to Barbara, it was a goldmine. She seized every opportunity while cleaning or accompanying her boss to strike up conversations with J. Seward Johnson about European art, historical periods, and the preservation of antiquities. Incredibly, the stern-faced maid who spoke broken English became the sole person in that colossal house who could truly comprehend and share the aging billionaire's greatest passion. Many believed this was just a stroke of luck, a pre-planned seduction orchestrated by a clever gold digger. However, looking at it realistically reveals a highly sophisticated, unspoken power game played by both sides. Barbara was a shrewd woman. She quickly read the deep fractures running through the household. She saw a tyrannical yet lonely boss, alienated by his wife and treated as a cash cow by his children. She understood that to enter this upper-class world, she had to accept the lowest position, endure the silence, and work with absolute focus to make herself completely indispensable to him. She did not try to climb the ladder through cheap, obvious tricks. She transformed herself into his emotional anchor, an art advisor, and the only person who made Johnson feel genuinely respected. Crucially, there is a major fact that history often overlooks. J. Seward Johnson actively chose her. A corporate Titan veteran is not easily fooled by a maid unless he wants to be. Johnson saw in Barbara the perfect outsider. She did not belong to the hypocritical world of old money. She had no alliances with his children, and most importantly, she was always there, ready to serve whenever he called, while his own flesh and blood only showed up for holidays or to get a check signed. To Johnson, Barbara was a safe ally, someone he could completely control and trust in his final years. Their relationship, therefore, went far beyond simple physical desire or money. It was a mutual recognition of utility, an unspoken pact between two people who saw exactly what they needed in each other. When this bond transitioned from an intellectual appreciation of art into an open, intimate relationship in the early 1970s, the boundary between master and servant inside the Johnson mansion was completely obliterated. The woman who once could not even cook a proper meal had now moved to the absolute center of the household, ready to leverage this intimacy into ultimate power. This quiet shift turned the atmosphere of the house into a literal powder keg, as the rightful heirs began to realize they were losing control to someone they had always looked down upon. The public nature of the relationship between the aging billionaire and his Polish maid quickly plunged the household into an unprecedentedly toxic atmosphere. Imagine how Esther, his legal wife at the time, felt having to watch a woman who used to clean her rooms and wash her laundry now casually sit beside her husband on trips, being treated as his official partner. The humiliation was made even more bitter by the fact that both the household staff and high society were witnessing this spectacular role reversal. The Johnson children could not contain their fury either. They viewed Barbara as a hostile intruder who had stolen their father's loyalty. Their resentment intensified daily, as every attempt to see their father now had to clear Barbara's strict gatekeeping. Ultimately, Esther filed for a multi-million-dollar divorce. This massive legal separation did not just end a marriage on paper, it significantly depleted the vast fortune the children expected to inherit. For the 6 siblings, this was definitive proof that their elderly father was being totally manipulated by a much younger woman. In 1971, immediately after the divorce was finalized, Seward Johnson officially married Barbara in a quiet ceremony that not a single one of his children attended. High society, which fiercely guarded lineage and breeding, deeply struggled to accept this union, especially given the age gap of over 40 years between the newlyweds. Immediately following the wedding, the couple began construction on Jasna Polana, a massive 140-acre estate outside Princeton, costing an estimated $30 million to build and decorate. This was not merely a house, it was a physical manifestation of Barbara's dominion. Fully utilizing her art history knowledge, she personally oversaw every minute detail, selecting classical master paintings, tapestries, religious antiquities, and museum-quality furniture. Jasna Polana became Barbara's personal kingdom. To the Johnson children, every painting on the wall and every manicured blade of grass served as a mocking reminder that the former maid now controlled their father's daily life, his taste, his living space, and, most terrifyingly, his estate planning. By this point, the children's contempt for Barbara reached an absolute fever pitch. They hurled the vilest insults at her, painting her as a low-class social climber trying to reach above her station. But this is where we have to appreciate Barbara's true resilience. The social ostracization from upper-class elites did not break her. Instead, she viewed it as a fair price to pay for real, tangible power. A power that this elite class would never have willingly handed her. As Johnson entered his 80s, his health declined drastically due to advanced prostate cancer. Constant hospitalizations and the heavy use of strong painkillers left the billionaire swinging between moments of clarity and utter confusion. In this environment, life at Jasna Polana became increasingly sealed off. Barbara became the ultimate gatekeeper, tightly controlling everything from his bedroom to his phone calls, effectively cutting off the children's access to their dying father. Later during the court trial, a secret audio recording surfaced, capturing Barbara furiously screaming at another maid named Isabella in a bathroom. Speaking in Polish, her tone was incredibly tyrannical and harsh. The children used this tape as ironclad proof that Barbara was a monster, a bully using aggression to terrify an 87-year-old dying man. However, if you flip the perspective, that recording revealed a much more direct truth. Barbara had seized complete, absolute control of that house, ruling it with iron discipline. Remarkably, this total dominance was not a stealthy robbery. It was a mandate that had been implicitly authorized and approved by J. Seward Johnson himself. The aging billionaire had fully handed the keys of his fortress to the only woman who stayed by his side, setting up a catastrophic showdown with his children where the question of the will became the only thing left to fight for. In May 1983, J. Seward Johnson passed away at the age of 87. But just a few weeks before his final breath, he managed to sign his last will and testament, an act that instantly triggered a legal earthquake. This will completely tore up all previous asset distribution formulas, leaving virtually the entire multi-million-dollar empire to a single person. Barbara. The 6 biological children were not completely cut out, but what they received was a bitter insult. The eldest son, J. Seward Johnson Jr., was left a mere $1 million and a house in Cape Cod, an inheritance he later bitterly described as feeling like being slapped in the face with a cold fish, a public humiliation broadcast to the world. The Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institution, an organization he had long championed and which was slated to receive $72 million worth of stock, was also mercilessly crossed out. All of America was stunned. People looked at the will and immediately jumped to the obvious conclusion: this was ultimate proof that the Polish maid had totally brainwashed a senile old man on his deathbed. But this is precisely where the traditional narrative shatters to reveal a completely different truth. If you look squarely at the reality of this power game, that shocking will was not the result of a one-sided scam. It was something far more deliberate, a calculated pact, a cold contract between 2 individuals who each achieved their goals. Think about J. Seward Johnson. He was a seasoned corporate wolf, and until his final days, he was not insane. He knew exactly what his children thought of him. He understood they viewed him as nothing more than a financial vault. Therefore, the will was not a sudden moment of weakness brought on by infatuation. It was the most calculated, brutal punishment a father could inflict on his own bloodline. The aging billionaire wanted to send a final, unyielding message. Blood ties do not automatically guarantee an inheritance, and those who treat a father with cold indifference will pay the price. To execute this revenge, Johnson needed a sharp, unbreakable weapon, and Barbara was perfect for the job. As for Barbara, she knew full well that once this will was made public, she would face the absolute hatred of an entire dynasty, the scorn of the global media, and a vicious legal war. Any other woman might have backed down in terror, but not Barbara. She was a deeply pragmatic woman with an unshakable vision. She willingly played the villain, accepting every curse and social stigma hurled by high society, because she knew that price was entirely worth the ultimate transformation, evolving from a penniless servant into the legitimate legal owner of a multi-million-dollar empire. To put it bluntly, the 1983 will was a bizarre, retroactive prenuptial agreement, executed long before prenups became standard operating procedure for the ultra-wealthy. Between Johnson and Barbara, there was no room for romantic delusions. They were bound by a ruthless understanding. An old father who wanted to use his wealth to teach his children a lesson they would never forget, and an outsider woman willing to execute that order to permanently change her destiny. They entered the final chapter of Johnson's life as the ultimate loyal allies, quietly preparing for an explosion that his children never saw coming. Immediately after the will was filed, one of the most brutal legal battles in American history erupted in early 1986. The trial dragged on for 17 consecutive weeks, transforming into a public theater that exposed the absolute dirtiest secrets of this billionaire dynasty. To prepare for this war of attrition, the two sides mobilized a colossal army of over 200 lawyers, top psychiatrists, and an endless stream of witnesses, burning through more than $20 million in legal fees, an unthinkable sum at the time. In the courtroom, two completely opposing narratives clashed without mercy. The 6 biological children did everything possible to portray Barbara as an evil tyrant who had intentionally isolated their frail father, cutting off phone lines and restricting family visits to easily manipulate him into signing the will while his mind was completely clouded by heavy pain medication. Conversely, Barbara's team fired back with equally devastating counterattacks. Her lawyers argued that the Johnson children were actually nothing but a pack of greedy parasites, individuals who already possessed immense wealth from older trust funds, but simply refused to be satisfied. They unmasked the truth that these children rarely visited their father while he was suffering from terminal illness, yet materialized instantly the moment they smelled a multi-million-dollar payout. As the battle hung in a tense balance, the Johnson children unleashed the weapon they believed would completely destroy their stepmother's credibility, the secret bathroom recording. Barbara's sharp, aggressive voice echoed through the courtroom via a translator as she tore into her maid, Isabella. The children gloated, believing this tape proved Barbara was an abusive control freak, arguing that if she treated staff this way, she would easily use that same terror to coerce an 87-year-old dying man. But once again, looking past the surface reveals that this weapon accidentally proved the exact opposite. It showed that Barbara had truly become the supreme authority, running the household with iron discipline. Furthermore, this absolute dominance was not a stealthy theft. It was the exact shield Seward Johnson had authorized to protect his privacy from the very children he had estranged. The trial ground on until mid-1986, reaching its climax on the very night before the jury was set to deliver its verdict. Sensing the immense risk of letting a random jury decide their fates, both sides agreed to sit down at the negotiating table and sign a settlement. When the dust settled, Barbara walked out of the courthouse with a near-total victory, retaining an estimated $300 to $350 million in cash, stock, and the entire estate. The 6 biological children, after all their bitter mudslinging, walked away with just an additional $6 to $7 million each, a microscopic fraction of the total empire. The Harbor Branch institution also had a portion of its funding, restored just enough to survive. The epic legal war concluded without a formal ruling from the judge on whether the billionaire had been manipulated, leaving a deeply calculated ending where the money simply found its own path. Stepping out of that courtroom with a mind-boggling fortune, Barbara chose to retreat into a life of high-end seclusion in Europe, splitting her time between Monaco and her native Poland. Over the decades, her capital continuously compounded, skyrocketed to around $2 to $3 billion by the mid-2000s, cementing her status as one of the wealthiest women on earth. Yet, the ghost of her impoverished past never truly left her. Stories leaked out that despite controlling billions, Barbara practiced extreme, borderline obsessive financial control, reportedly forcing her household staff to use coupons when buying items at Dunkin' Donuts. This is the distinct psychology of someone who once knew what it felt like to have absolutely nothing. A person for whom wealth, no matter how massive, always feels fragile and temporary. Barbara passed away on April 1st, 2013, in Poland at the age of 76. The obituaries published that day ran the exact same headlines the media had used for 3 decades prior. She left behind a colossal fortune and a legendary cautionary tale for the global elite. If you do not lock down your fortress, the servant who knows all your secrets can easily become the owner of your house. Her journey exposes the ruthless truth of old money, that ultimate power does not automatically belong to bloodlines, but to the person with the patience and sharpness to leverage contempt into power. Between J. Seward Johnson and Barbara, there was likely no fairy tale romance. They were bound by a pragmatic alliance, a billionaire who wanted to use his wealth to execute a final, cold lesson, and a woman who was more than willing to pull the trigger to rewrite her life. What do you think about this power game? Was Barbara a greedy manipulator, or was she a brilliant, ruthless strategist who capitalized on a family that was already hollowed out from within? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to join me as we dissect the next dark secrets of the ultra-wealthy. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.